In this video, I'm going to talk about why storytelling is the #1 skill that you have to begin developing immediately. A few years back, I had a friend named Kevin who was a client of mine in one of my programs. It was an accountability program that I was doing at the time, and it was awesome. But Kevin and I had been friends for a while. In fact, I had met him in a coaching program that I was a part of. So we just became friendly, and we started to talk to one another, and he eventually became my client. Well, one day after our accountability call, Kevin said, "Devin, would you mind if we just sit down and talk for a second?" Of course, via Zoom. And I said, "Of course, Kevin, what's up?" He said, "I just got to tell you something, man." I said, "What's going on, Kevin? What's going on?" He said, "Devin, I had an experience the other day that totally transformed my life. And I want to share with you that experience because this showed me why storytelling is so important." So Kevin sat me down and he said, "Devin, I want to give you a little back history of who I am. Because I know that we're friendly, but I haven't really told you everything that I've been through in my life. So I should have, of course, Kevin, please tell me. So he said, "Kevin, all my life, I grew up as the kid that other parents would look at their children and say, 'You do not want to grow up to be like Kevin.' From an early age, I got into drugs and I got into alcohol and I started to steal stuff and I was a thief. I was in and out of prison, and I was just no good in the eyes of society. And as I grew older, I noticed that I was developing a really bad, addictive personality. And as I continued to get older and older and older, I started to get more and more addicted to alcohol. And Devin, it got to the point in my early 20s where I just couldn't control it. Where I would look in the mirror and the person that was staring back at me, it was just a horrible sight. I just stared back at the reflection and said, 'Is this what my life has come to?' And he said, 'Devin, I was just sick of the person that I was. And I knew that I could not continue to live this way.'" Have you ever had that where you just had that experience where you know that you just couldn't continue to live the way that you were living? So Kevin said, "Devin, I made the decision that I was going to," and it hurts me to say, Kevin said, but I made the decision that I was going to check myself into a rehab facility. Because as much of a man as I wanted to be, I had to do something to keep my sanity. I had to do something to get me back on track. So he said, "Devin, I checked myself into this rehab facility, and the first 2 weeks were the worst 2 weeks of my life. Being withdrawn from all the drugs and the alcohol, it was devastating to me. And it honestly felt as if my life was going to collapse." So he said, "Devin, I did the one thing that I could think of. I don't know how this thought came to me," Kevin said, but he said, "Devin, all I did was I went online and I looked up motivational video." I said, "Okay, what's so relevant about that, Kevin?" And he said, "Devin, I started watching all of these motivational videos. And a couple weeks went by, my life didn't change. 3 weeks went by, nothing changed. But after about a month, I noticed something starting to happen." He said, "I started to notice that I was just a bit more happy. I was a bit more optimistic. I was enjoying life a little more. It was as if I didn't have to depend on an external source such as beer or alcohol or drugs to bring me happiness. Instead, I was seemingly finding it internally." So I said, "Wow, Kevin, that's awesome." And he said, "Devin, I'm so excited to share this with you," because it got to the point where I kept on watching all of these motivational videos. And he said, "What really intrigued me was hearing everybody else's stories." He said, "Devin, that was the thing that did it for me. Hearing other people's stories showed me what was possible for me." And he said, "Devin, after about 3 months of being in that rehab facility, I was able to get out, leave that rehab facility, and praise God, never go back in." And he said, "Devin, as I got out and I started to work a job and I started to get my own place, I started to reflect on my journey," Kevin said. "And I was really thinking, well, what was the one thing that changed it all for me?" And finally, Kevin said, "Devin, the thing that changed everything for me was listening to somebody else's stories." He said, "Devin, when I started to listen to all of those stories and all of those videos, something changed within me. And he said, Devin, I made a decision as I sat on my couch in my apartment, as I started to think about what was the thing, and then I found out and I reflected, and that it was these people's stories. He said, I made the decision right there, right then, that despite not being a millionaire, despite barely having enough money for rent, despite being the person that the parents of children would warn their children, you don't want to grow up to be like Kevin, despite being somebody that was an addict, a thief, despite all of that, I made the decision that I was going to begin sharing my story for one reason. And that one reason is because I wanted to do for other people what other people had done for me. He said, Devin, other people's stories changed my life, so I felt an internal obligation to go ahead and use my stories and my experiences to change somebody else's life. So I made the decision right there, right then, Devin, that day on my couch, that I was going to be the one to share the stories now. And I didn't care what anyone said. I said, Kevin, that's amazing. And I said, what happened next? He said, I started to post my testimony. I started to post my stories, my experiences on YouTube, on Instagram, and Facebook. And he said, Devin, it was tough. For months, nobody watched my stuff. Not a click, not a like, not a comment, not one subscribe. And it got to the point where I looked at my YouTube and it said like 5 minutes watch time. And he said, Devin, I didn't know if I wanted to continue. But there was something inside of me, Kevin said, that just said, continue to do it, because you don't know whose life will be different because of you. So I continued to do it. More months go by. And Devin, just the other day, something happened that changed my life. And I said, Kevin, what was it? He said, Devin, I was just sitting there on my couch watching TV, and I got a number from a blocked call, like a blocked number. And usually I don't answer these because it's usually spam or something of the sort. So I just said, nah, forget it. But as I went to go put my phone back down, there was just something inside of me that said, pick it up, pick it up, pick it up. So I grabbed my phone and I picked it up and I said, hello. And there was a woman on the other line. The woman said, hi, is this Kevin? And Kevin didn't recognize the voice. So he said, yes, who's this? And the woman said, Kevin, it's me. And Kevin said, I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't know who you are. And then the woman said, Kevin, it's me from the rehab facility. And at that moment, Kevin recognized the voice. It was the voice of one of the friends that he had made in the rehab facility, but he hadn't really kept up with her once he left. And he said, oh, how are you? How's everything? And she cut him off abruptly. She said, Kevin, I don't have much time. She said, before I did this thing, I wanted to call you because I know if there was one person in this world that could stop me from doing what I'm about to do, that it would be you. And Kevin paused and he said, what are you talking about? And she said, Kevin, before I take my life, I wanted to call you. Because I knew if there was one person in the world that could talk me out of it, it would be you. And Kevin didn't know what to say. Could you imagine being in Kevin's shoes? And he had all these thoughts going through his head, but finally he just blurted out the first thought that came to his head. He said, well, why'd you call me? Out of everybody, why'd you call me? And this is what she said. She said, Kevin, I decided to call you because I saw you share your story. See, the only reason she picked up the phone that day when she was about to take her life was because she knew that Kevin, only because he shared his story, could potentially save her. Thank God, Kevin said, as I sit here across from you right now, Devin, that woman is still alive. But I want to ask you watching me right now, what is the reason for her being alive today? Okay, there might be a multitude of reasons, but in my opinion, the primary reason is because Kevin was courageous enough to go out on a limb and share his stories and experiences with the world. Despite not being a millionaire or super successful, He said, if this just does for others what it did for me, it would be worth it. And Kevin got that story that he can now cherish forever, where because of sharing his stories and experiences, someone is still here today. So what's my purpose behind this? My purpose behind this is to ask you the question, whose life will your stories and experiences save? Now, you might not be able to answer that question right now, but what I do know is that if you become courageous enough to understand that if you share your story, somebody's life will never be the same. One of my mentors always used to tell me, Devin, the story that you're sitting on is the story that somebody else is waiting on. See, you can be the answer to somebody's prayers. Somebody is on their knees right now pleading with God to hear your testimony, to hear how you overcame, to hear how you conquered, to hear how you fell and still rose above. So I encourage you, if there's one skill that you begin to develop the skill of storytelling. Why? Because sure, there are skills out there that can generate profit and grow business and revenue, but there's not many skills out there that can do all of that, generate revenue, grow profits, and all of the good stuff, but also totally transform and even save somebody's life. So I want to encourage you, if you have decided that you want to take that next level and you want to learn the skill of storytelling, I've put together a super special training down below for you. Just hit the link. I would love to send it over to you for absolutely free. I'm going to be sharing 3 key secrets in there that will enable you to not only understand how to use storytelling, but understand why it works so well. So if you don't take anything else away from this video, begin sharing your story because somebody in the world is waiting to hear it.